in the heart of a collapsing mine, surrounded by smoke, fear, and the cries of trapped children. A German shepherd named Rex refused to give up. Bloodied and exhausted, he dragged stretcher after stretcher through falling debris, his courage burning brighter than the darkness around him. Every breath was a battle, every step a choice to save another life, until even the most powerful man behind the nightmare could not escape Rex's fury. But what happened after the dust settled would leave everyone speechless. What did Rex become in the end? The room was small, sealed tight as though the air itself was rationed. And within its suffocating walls, 27 children pressed close together, their thin breaths weaving a fragile chorus that echoed against the cracked plaster and the rusted metal door. The air smelled of damp concrete and the faint acrid tang of disinfectant, a scent that seemed to cling to their hair and clothes, turning even the simplest act of inhaling into something heavy, as though each breath cost them a piece of hope. The floor beneath them was hard and cold, strewn with thin blankets that did little to fight back the chill rising from the stone. Some of the children sat with their backs against the wall, knees pulled to their chests, eyes wide and shining in the half-light, while others lay curled together in small clusters like birds huddled in a storm. The older ones had instinctively taken on the role of guardians, wrapping their frail arms around the youngest, whispering quiet words that carried no real certainty, but managed, somehow, to soften the fear that quivered in those small bodies. One boy, perhaps 12 years old, sat with his sister's head resting on his lap. He ran his fingers through her tangled hair, repeating the same gentle promise that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow someone would come. Tomorrow the door would open and they would see the sky again. He did not believe his own words completely, but when he saw her eyes close and her lips curl into the faintest shadow of a smile, he decided that faith, whether true or not, was worth giving. The room held no windows, only a narrow vent high above the door through which a weak strip of light spilled like a hesitant hand reaching in from another world. That faint glow cut across the children's faces, highlighting cheekbones that jutted too sharply, eyes that had learned too much too soon, and yet also revealing something defiant. A refusal to let despair extinguish the ember of survival that glowed deep within them. In the silence, broken only by the occasional cough or the shuffle of small feet against the floor, one could almost hear the pulse of that ember, beating steadily against the overwhelming dark. Among them lay a little girl named Lily. Her frame was slight, her hair matted and falling across her pale forehead, but her lips moved softly even in restless sleep. She whispered 2 words that rose above the hush like a fragile prayer. "Mama, please." The sound was so delicate it seemed to dissolve the moment it touched the air. Yet every child who heard it felt the weight of it settle in their chest. It was not just Lily's plea. It was their own. A longing each of them carried, but rarely dared to voice aloud. The echo of her small voice traveled across the room and lingered there, a reminder of the love that tied them all to a world beyond these walls. A boy sitting near the door turned his gaze toward the faint shaft of light, his expression one of fierce concentration, as though he might will it to widen, to break open into a flood that would wash away the shadows. His lips moved without sound, shaping words he had no strength to say. Let the light grow. Let it reach us. Let it bring someone here. The younger children, too weary to comprehend the depth of their situation, found comfort in the presence of the older ones. A girl of about 9 pressed a finger to her lips, urging silence when one of the smaller boys began to cry. She pulled him into her arms, rocking gently, humming a tune she remembered from her mother's kitchen, a melody that smelled of warm bread and carried the sound of laughter through a sunlit window. The tune was fractured and trembling, but it was music. And in that place where sound was more often cruel than kind, It felt like a miracle. Every child in that room carried memories that both comforted and wounded. A playground swing creaking in the wind, a father's call from the porch at dusk, the smell of soap after a warm bath. They clung to these fragments, polishing them with thought until they glowed like tiny stars in the cavern of their minds. And when one of them began to lose grip on such memories, another would share theirs, creating a constellation of borrowed light that helped them endure the endless hours. The door never opened except when food arrived. Tasteless gruel pushed in through a slot at the bottom, never accompanied by a human voice, never explained, never enough. The children had learned to stretch each bite, passing bowls hand to hand, ensuring that the littlest mouths always had something to swallow, even if it meant the older ones went hungry. Hunger gnawed at them constantly, but it also bound them together, teaching them that survival was not a solitary act, but a shared one. In the corner, two boys knelt side by side, their hands clasped tightly, as though through contact they could transfer strength. They were not brothers by blood, yet in the room where identity had been stripped away, they had become family. They promised each other that when rescue came, they would not be separated, that they would run together into the daylight and never look back. The conviction in their whisper gave shape to a future that none of them could yet see, but all desperately needed to believe in. The room itself seemed to press in closer with each passing hour. The walls held the echo of countless sighs. The floor bore the imprint of restless shifting, and the very ceiling sagged with the weight of hopelessness. Yet the children refused to let the dark claim them entirely. They had become each other's shelter, each other's voice, each other's fragile anchor to life. Lily stirred in her sleep, her small hand twitching as though reaching for something beyond her grasp. Her lips parted again, and this time her voice, though faint, carried a little stronger. "Mama, I'm here." The words pierced the gloom, sending a ripple through the gathered children. One of the older girls bent low, brushing Lily's hair back from her face, whispering that her mother would come, that they would all be found, that this nightmare would end. She did not know if any of it was true, but the way Lily's fingers stilled and her breathing eased told her the words had done their work. Hope in that place was a fragile thing, easily broken, yet impossible to extinguish. It lived in the way the children leaned into one another, in the way they shared the warmth of their bodies against the cold, in the way they took turns keeping watch on the sliver of light above the door. It lived in the songs half remembered, the promises whispered in the dark, the gentle pressure of one hand finding another. Hours blended into days, though none of them could tell exactly how much time had passed. Their world was reduced to the rhythm of breaths, the flicker of shadows, the trembling of a child's shoulders when tears came unbidden. Yet within that narrow existence, something unbreakable was forming. A unity born not of choice but of necessity, a strength forged in silence and suffering. And so they waited, hearts pounding in fragile synchrony, eyes trained on the thin blade of light that fell through the vent, a symbol of a world that still existed beyond the heavy door. Somewhere out there, they told themselves, someone was searching, someone was listening, someone was walking closer with every step. The children did not know his name yet, did not know the sound of his boots on the ground or the deep breath of the dog that walked beside him. But in the quiet of that room, as Lily whispered once more for her mother, and the others pressed close around her, a sense of something approaching began to stir in the air. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to still their whispers for a heartbeat, enough to lift every gaze toward the crack of light. enough to make their small hearts race with a new rhythm. They felt, without understanding why, that change was near, that the silence outside the door was about to break, that the first note of rescue had already begun to sound somewhere far away. The town of Pinebrook, nestled against the quiet shoulders of the mountains, woke each morning to the sound of trucks rumbling down Main Street and the thin whistle of wind slipping between the rooftops. For most of its 8,000 residents, life moved in predictable rhythms, the kind that promised comfort, but also carried the weight of routine. For Officer Ethan Ward, however, mornings had become a slow negotiation between duty and despair, a balancing act that demanded far more of him than the uniform on his back or the badge on his chest. He was 41 years old, with a face lined not just by years of service, but by the nights spent staring at ceilings, calculating medical bills that grew taller than any stack of case files. His wife, Claire, had been fighting stage 3 cancer for nearly 2 years. And though there had been moments of hope, brief glimmers when her strength seemed to return and her laughter echoed again through their small kitchen, the reality was relentless. The treatments that offered her a real chance, experimental protocols whispered about in oncology circles, the kind that shimmered with the promise of life, cost more than his salary could ever reach. Insurance had turned its back on them months ago, leaving Ethan to wrestle with numbers that refused to bend to his will. Their kitchen table, once a place where Claire used to set down plates of steaming soup and where their conversations lingered long into the night, had transformed into a battlefield of envelopes and notices. Each piece of paper felt like a blow, stamped with figures that carried the weight of despair. Ethan often sat at that table after long shifts, still wearing his uniform, his broad shoulders slumped, his eyes dimmed, the pen trembling in his hand as he tried again and again to find a way through. And every time, without fail, the sound of soft paws against the linoleum would announce the arrival of Rex, the 5-year-old German shepherd who had become more than just his partner. Rex was not merely a dog trained to track, to protect, to bite on command. He was a presence that breathed steadiness into Ethan's collapsing world. His amber eyes seemed to see more than they should, as if he could measure the heaviness of Ethan's heart and choose the precise moment to nudge his head beneath his hand or rest his weight against his leg. Some nights, when Ethan thought Claire was asleep, he sat in the living room with his head in his hands, and Rex, sensing the fracture, would climb up beside him, pressing his warm body close until the trembling stopped. Yet lately, even Rex had changed. His ears twitched at sounds that had always been part of the background. His body stiffened at scents that wafted unseen through alleyways and door frames. He would freeze, hackles raised, staring into corners of the world where no threat seemed to exist. The department's veterinarian found nothing wrong with him. But Ethan, who had learned to trust his partner more than he trusted his own instincts, knew something was stirring beneath the surface. On that cold February morning, Ethan walked his beat with Rex at his side, the leash taut, not because the dog resisted, but because he seemed to pull towards something invisible, a force that neither of them could see, but both could feel. Snow flurries drifted down from a sky the color of steel, settling on Rex's thick coat, melting almost instantly into droplets that gleamed against the black and tan fur. Ethan shifted the coffee cup in his hand, took a sip, and let his eyes roam across Jackson's Market, the familiar storefront where half the town came for groceries. It was then that Rex stopped. His body turned into a statue of muscle and focus, ears pricked forward, chest low to the ground, every line of him radiating tension. The growl that rolled from his throat was not the sound of warning reserved for stray dogs or careless intruders. It was deeper, heavier, an ancient vibration that seemed to rise from his very bones. Ethan felt it in his own chest, a rumble that traveled up the leash and into his arm, freezing him in place. He followed Rex's gaze. At first, all he saw were the ordinary movements of a small town morning. People pushing carts, a woman laughing as a carton of eggs slipped and shattered on the tile floor, a cashier calling out for paper towels. But then, he noticed him. A man near the back of the market, tall, shoulders hunched, cradling something in his arms. It was a child. The little girl's head lolled to one side, golden curls spilling over the crook of the man's elbow, her body limp as though sleep had swallowed her whole. Yet something about her stillness pierced Ethan like a shard of ice. Children did not hang like that. Children stirred, shifted, reached for the security of the arms that carried them. This one was silent, too silent, and the man holding her moved with a desperation that reeked not of protection, but of escape. "Easy, boy," Ethan whispered, though his own voice shook. But Rex was beyond calming. With a sudden force that nearly tore the leash from Ethan's hand, the dog lunged, claws scraping against the pavement as he launched himself toward the entrance. His bark exploded through the winter air, sharp and commanding, drawing every eye toward the scene unraveling at the glass doors of the market. The man's eyes widened, his face pale beneath the flickering fluorescent lights, and for an instant he froze like a deer caught in the beam of headlights. Then, clutching the child tighter, he bolted. He ran with the reckless speed of someone who knew there was no other path left, his boots slipping against the tile as shoppers screamed and scattered. Ethan's training surged forward, his body moving before thought could catch up. "Rex, go!" His command sliced through the chaos, and the German shepherd obeyed without hesitation, his powerful legs propelling him forward, closing the distance between prey and predator in seconds. The crowd erupted into confusion. Carts toppled, cans rolled across the floor, the sound of frightened voices rose and clashed. Yet through it all, the figure of the man and the child cut a clear, terrible image. Innocence trapped in the arms of something sinister. Salvation racing behind, with teeth bared and eyes aflame. Ethan pushed through the mess, his boots pounding, heart slamming against his ribs. He felt the weight of every choice he had ever made pressed down on him in that instant. Every night spent at Claire's side whispering promises he could not keep. Every hour he had watched her strength fade while bills grew higher. Every moment he had doubted whether he could protect what mattered most. And now here was another child, someone else's daughter, dangling on the edge of vanishing, waiting for him to decide if he was strong enough to stop it. Rex leapt, a blur of muscle and fur, colliding with the man's leg with the precision of a weapon guided by instinct sharper than any blade. The man staggered, his grip on the child faltering as Rex's jaws clamped around fabric, pulling with a force that dragged him to the floor. The girl's small body tumbled free, landing softly in the arms of a panicked shopper who had thrown herself forward at the last second. The man thrashed, cursing, trying to wrench free, but Rex held fast, his growl reverberating like thunder through the tiled room. Ethan was there in moments, handcuffs in hand, his knee pressing into the man's back as he forced his wrists together. Shouts filled the air, questions, fear, the sound of the child's shallow breathing. But all Ethan could hear was the pulse in his ears and the steady, unyielding growl of the dog, who had once again seen what no one else could. The little girl did not cry. She did not even open her eyes. Her tiny chest rose and fell in fragile rhythm, her face peaceful in a way that felt wrong, as though sleep had been forced upon her. Ethan's heart clenched as he reached out, brushing a curl from her forehead, whispering words meant to comfort, though she could not hear them. "You're safe now," he murmured, though deep inside he knew safety was still a long way off. For a moment, the chaos around them blurred. He saw only Claire's face in his mind, her smile thin but stubborn, her hand resting weakly in his as she whispered for him to keep fighting. And he thought of the table, covered in bills, of the numbers that refused to bend, of the nights he had wondered if he had already failed her. Then he looked down at Rex, whose jaws remained locked, whose body shook with the effort of holding, whose eyes burned with the certainty of action. The German shepherd had chosen, as he always did, without hesitation, without fear. And as Ethan slipped the cuffs tight around the man's wrists, he realized that in this moment, his own choice had been made too. The world beyond the market was waiting, the sky still heavy with snow, the road outside lined with curious faces. But inside, Ethan felt the shift of something larger, a movement beneath the surface of the life he thought he knew. He could not yet see its shape, could not yet measure its reach, but he felt it pressing close, as real as the weight of Rex's body against his side. And as the child was carried out into the cold air, her breath a faint mist against the winter sky, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The dark that held these children was wider than one room, deeper than one man's arms, and somewhere far beyond, its shadows were still spreading. The interrogation room was quiet in the way a cave is quiet, not because silence ruled, but because it pressed from all directions, thick and immovable, forcing every breath to sound louder than it should. Officer Ethan Ward sat on one side of the table, his uniform still dusted with the faint powder of shattered plaster from the grocery store, while across from him, the man who had called himself Daniel Cross sat perfectly still, wrists bound, gaze fixed on some invisible horizon only he could see. Daniel's face was unreadable, sculpted into the kind of mask that gave away neither innocence nor guilt. And perhaps that was the most unsettling detail of all. He did not shout, did not protest, did not even attempt the desperate denials that most suspects clung to like rope in a storm. Instead, he sat as if carved from stone, his breathing steady, his hands limp on the table. Ethan had seen liars before. He had seen panicked thieves, trembling abusers, even killers whose eyes darted as if escape might appear if they just stared hard enough at the wall. But Daniel Cross was something else. There was a calm to him that felt wrong, a quiet born not of peace but of calculation, as though the man was a small piece of a much larger machine. And this setback, his arrest, his exposure, was nothing more than a pause in a system that would continue grinding forward with or without him. In the corner of the room, lying at Ethan's feet, Rex shifted restlessly. The German shepherd had not relaxed since the moment they brought the suspect in. His body, usually coiled with steady patience, now quivered with unease. His nose twitched, his ears flicked, and his amber eyes never left the bundle of belongings sealed in the evidence bag on the counter. Every few minutes, he let out a low sound, not the sharp bark of alarm, but a kind of suppressed whine that seemed to plead for attention. Ethan had learned long ago that Rex's instincts deserved more trust than most men's testimony. The dog had saved his life more than once, had tracked lost children through forests where human searchers had given up, had sensed fear and deception in ways no training manual could explain. And now that same animal sat trembling at the sight of a worn denim jacket stuffed in a plastic sleeve. The thought gnawed at Ethan until he finally rose, pulling on the latex gloves that rested in a box by the door. He glanced once at Daniel Cross, who met his eyes briefly before turning away, the faintest curl of something, contempt, amusement, perhaps resignation, playing at the corner of his mouth. The jacket looked ordinary enough when Ethan slid it from the bag. The fabric was worn in places, the cuffs frayed, the smell of cigarettes and motor oil clinging to it like a second skin. But as he laid it flat across the metal table, Rex surged forwards, pressing his nose along the seams, his entire body vibrating with focus. He pawed at the hem, let out a sharp bark that startled even Ethan, then pressed his muzzle against the lower lining as if demanding it be opened. Ethan frowned. He ran his fingers along the fabric, feeling for irregularities. And that was when he noticed it. The seam was thicker than it should have been, stiff where the rest of the jacket folded easily. His pulse quickened. With careful precision, he drew a utility knife from the evidence kit, slicing gently along the hidden stitch. Threads snapped, and within moments a small fold of paper slid free, crumpled yet stubbornly intact, like a secret that had waited too long in the dark. He spread it out on the table. The paper was no ordinary scrap. It looked like it had been torn from a napkin, the ink smudged, the edges frayed. But the markings were deliberate. Rough lines traced highways and county roads. Circles marked rest stops. Triangles indicated gas stations. At the center, outlined in heavy red strokes, was a name scrawled in block letters. Silver Creek Facility. Ethan's throat tightened. He had lived his whole career chasing small crimes that bruised a town, but never broke it. Domestic disputes, drunk drivers, petty theft. There were moments of violence, yes, moments of tragedy, but they were contained, individual. This was something else. The map before him was not the signature of a lone kidnapper. It was a blueprint, a route, a system. Rex growled softly, his gaze flicking from the map to the man in the chair. And for a moment Ethan swore the air itself seemed to shift, thickening with the gravity of realization. This isn't just about one girl, Ethan murmured, almost to himself. He saw again the limp body of the child in Daniel's arms, the way her curls had framed her silent face, the unnatural stillness of her breathing. He remembered the way Rex had lunged without hesitation, as if the dog had known that saving her was only the beginning of something far larger. Ethan lifted his eyes to Daniel Cross. "What's Silver Creek?" The man's lips twitched, not into a smile but into something colder. The faint flicker of someone who knows a question cannot be answered because the answer would reveal too much. He said nothing, only leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if the truth written on the paper meant nothing at all. But to Ethan, it meant everything. The map lay between them, like a wound opened wide, bleeding implications too vast to contain. 27 children whispered in the dark somewhere, their small voices trembling in prayer. Ethan did not know them, had never seen their faces, but as he traced the red circle with his gloved finger, he felt their presence pressing in, as if they too were in the room, urging him forward. And beneath the hum of the fluorescent light, as Rex lowered his head onto his paws, yet kept his eyes sharp and unblinking, Ethan understood that this night had changed the shape of his life. The world he had thought he knew, the steady beat of patrols, the long hours beside Claire's hospital bed, the quiet town that slept under the mountains, was crumbling at the edges. In its place rose a darker horizon, one marked by hidden roads, secret facilities, and a network that treated children as cargo. The jacket had given up its secret, but the secret was only the beginning. And as Ethan folded the map carefully back into its bag, Rex shifted again, his body tense, his gaze fixed not on the evidence, but on the man across the table, as though the dog could already sense that the battle ahead would not be fought with papers and pens, but with teeth, blood, and choices that could tear a man's soul in two. The snow fell in soft spirals outside the window of the Sunny Glen Care Facility, drifting past glass that bore the faint outlines of frost like delicate white lace. And behind that window sat Agnes Miller, 75 years old, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes fixed not on the snow itself, but on the distance beyond it, the distance where memory still lived and breathed. She had lost her granddaughter Hannah 10 years ago, a bright 16-year-old girl whose laughter once filled her modest home. And though the world had told Agnes to accept the loss, to bow her head and let the wound scar over, she never did. The pain remained raw, not because time failed to move forward, but because Agnes refused to let go of the thread that bound her to that child. To the staff of the facility, she was just another old woman in a chair by the window, her stories dismissed as the tired inventions of age. But inside, Agnes carried a fire that age had not dimmed, a stubborn flame that demanded she keep searching. The world may have written Hannah's disappearance into the long list of tragedies that fade from newspapers and slip from memory. But to Agnes, it was an unfinished sentence, a question that echoed through every hour she spent alone. Over the years, she had learned the art of persistence. When official channels closed their doors, she found others who still listened. Old friends from church, neighbors who had not forgotten her kindness, fellow residents of the facility who still had sharp eyes and ears, even if their bodies had grown weak. Piece by piece, like threads woven through a loom, Agnes began to gather fragments. A van parked too long near the abandoned mine outside town. A stranger seen buying rope and duct tape with hands that shook not from age, but from urgency. A late-night delivery at a gas station that never kept late hours. To the young, these were fragments, coincidences too small to matter. To Agnes, they were brushstrokes on a hidden canvas, forming an image that no one else wanted to see. Her network grew quietly, almost invisibly, like roots beneath the soil. There was Margaret Finch, who still walked with her cane down to the hardware store every week and had sharp enough memory to recall a man whose description matched the one she later saw on the evening news. There was Harold Denton, her late husband's old poker partner, who still played cards in the back room of the VFW hall and overheard things younger men believed he was too deaf to notice. There was Dorothy Chen, who volunteered at the soup kitchen and heard whispers from drifters who spoke of vans with covered windows. Each of them gave Agnes a piece, and though the pieces did not always fit, she laid them out in her mind, testing them against the silence, building the shape of something terrible. The television in the common room often blared daytime dramas or news segments that flickered past too quickly to matter. But when the report came about the girl rescued at the grocery store, Agnes felt the world tilt beneath her. The image of the child, her face pale, her body limp in the arms of strangers. Something about it struck like lightning. It was not Hannah. No. But it was connected. She could feel it. 10 years of waiting had taught her the difference between chance and pattern. And in that instant, Agnes knew, with the unshakable clarity that only grief can sharpen, that this event was a thread tied to the same knot that had stolen her granddaughter. She rose from her chair, her joints protesting, her body heavy with the weight of years, but her spirit surging with the urgency of discovery. In her small room, she pulled open the drawer where she kept her notes, scraps of paper, photographs, addresses scribbled on the backs of envelopes. It looked chaotic to anyone else. But to Agnes, it was a living map, the evidence of a decade's worth of refusal to let Hannah's name fade. She called her allies one by one, her voice trembling not from weakness, but from a rising tide of certainty. "Did you see the news?" she asked. "Did you see the little girl in the market? It means they're still here. It means the pattern is real." Her friends listened, some cautious, some quick to agree, but each of them understood that Agnes would not be stopped. And because they loved her, because they trusted the fierce steadiness in her eyes, they leaned in to help once more. That evening, they gathered at her small table in the facility's recreation room. The sound of bingo and laughter muffled by distance. their heads bent close over a puzzle that only they could see. Margaret spread out her notes. Harold shuffled his cards as though dealing secrets. Dorothy laid down slips of paper torn from old receipts. Together they built a mosaic of suspicion. Sightings of the same unmarked van, a stranger paying cash at odd hours, children's voices overheard in places they should never have been. The image forming between them was dark, terrifying in its scope, but also undeniable. And through it all, Agnes sat at the center, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. She knew she was closer now than she had ever been. The child rescued in the market was proof that the network existed, proof that the shadows were not phantoms of her grief, but real, dangerous, alive. She imagined Hannah, older now, perhaps hardened by whatever trials she had endured, but still her granddaughter, still the girl whose hair smelled of summer grass, still the child who once held her hand so tightly at the county fair. Agnes's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed, because this was not the time for sorrow. This was the time for resolve. She pressed her palm against the table, steadying herself, and whispered words meant as much for her friends as for her own heart. This is it. This is the sign I've been waiting for. That little girl means Hannah is not lost. I know it. I can feel it. The others exchanged looks, cautious yet softened by the certainty that glowed in her voice. They had followed her this far because they admired her will. But tonight they saw something else. Conviction so strong, it became contagious. Outside, the snow continued to fall, burying the town in silence. But inside that small room, a storm of determination gathered. Agnes Miller, 75 years old, dismissed by many as a frail widow with too much time on her hands, had drawn a map of her own, one built not on highways and markers, but on memory, connection, and a grandmother's unyielding love. And as the night stretched on, and the pieces of their puzzle came together, she leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed once more on the distance beyond the frosted glass. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness, her granddaughter was waiting. And Agnes knew, with the same unshakable faith that had carried her through 10 years of loneliness, that the moment to find Hannah had finally begun to arrive. The house was quiet except for the slow tick of the clock on the wall, each second striking louder than it should in the silence of midnight. Officer Ethan Ward sat at the edge of his kitchen table, the light above him dim, casting long shadows across the piles of medical bills that lay scattered like fallen leaves. Claire was asleep in the bedroom down the hall, her breathing shallow but steady, the faint hum of the oxygen machine a constant reminder of how fragile her life had become. Ethan rubbed a hand across his face, exhaustion sinking into his bones, when the shrill ring of the phone cut through the stillness. He almost didn't answer. Calls at this hour rarely carried good news, and his spirit was already heavy. But instinct forced his hand to the receiver, and when he lifted it to his ear, the voice on the other side was sharp, controlled, edged with urgency. Officer Ward, this is Special Agent Nora Kane with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I need your immediate attention regarding your suspect, Daniel Cross. Ethan straightened in his chair, the fatigue burning away in an instant. His eyes flicked toward the darkened hallway as if to check that Claire had not stirred, then back to the silent form of Rex lying at his feet. The German shepherd lifted his head, ears pricked as though he too had sensed the shift in the air. "What about him?" Ethan asked, his voice low. There was a pause, the kind that carried the weight of something terrible. "Your man cannot be Daniel Cross," Nora said finally. "The real Daniel Cross died 3 years ago in a fire outside Detroit. What you have in custody is using his name, his records, even his old identification. But the man himself, He's a ghost. Ethan felt the floor tilt beneath him. He thought back to the market, the limp body of the child, the cold expression on the suspect's face. Everything about him had felt wrong, and now the truth deepened that wrongness into something far larger. "Then who is he?" Ethan asked. "We don't know yet," Nora replied. "But what I can tell you is this. He's part of a network, a multi-state operation that spans across counties, highways, even borders. We've been tracking Whispers for years, and now your arrest confirms what we suspected. This isn't one man stealing one child. This is an enterprise moving dozens, maybe hundreds, through hidden channels. And Pinebrook, your quiet little town, is one of their routes." The words hit Ethan like a blow. His entire career had been built on keeping his town safe, on believing that the crimes he chased were isolated shadows in an otherwise decent place. But now the shadows stretched further than he could see, linking his town to something monstrous. He glanced down at Rex, whose eyes gleamed in the dim light, steady, unblinking, as if to remind him that no matter how large the darkness, they would face it together. Nora's voice softened, but carried no less gravity. "I need you to understand, Officer Ward. What you stumbled onto is only the edge of something vast. You're in danger now, whether you realize it or not. But so are the children. If you stay on this path, you won't be able to step back." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. Claire's face rising in his mind, pale against the pillow, her hand small and warm in his. He had promised to stay by her side, to fight for her. But now the cries of other children, faceless yet painfully real, echoed through the midnight silence. His heart split between the life he had built and the lives begging to be saved. When the call ended, Ethan sat motionless. The receiver still pressed to his ear long after the line had gone dead. He felt Rex nudge against his leg, a solid reminder that he was not alone, that his choices mattered not only to himself, but to the partner who trusted him with every breath. Miles away, in the quiet halls of the Sunny Glen Care facility, another phone rang. The hour was late, the nurses moving softly between rooms. But in her bed, Agnes Miller startled awake, the sound of the phone slicing through her dreams. She reached for it with trembling hands, pressing the receiver close, her voice a whisper of both hope and fear. "Hello?" On the other end came a voice she had not heard in 10 years, older now, steadier, touched by sorrow, yet still carrying the unmistakable tone of her granddaughter. "Grandma, it's me. It's Hannah." The world stopped. Agnes's breath caught in her throat, tears springing instantly to her eyes. For years she had prayed, searched, begged heaven for a sign. And now, through the fragile crackle of the phone line, her granddaughter's voice came alive. "Hannah? My darling girl, is it really you?" Her voice shook, the words tumbling out like a flood after too long a drought. "Yes, Grandma," the voice replied, breaking with emotion. "I'm alive. I've been working undercover with the Bureau. They pulled me into this network years ago, after I escaped. I couldn't tell you, I couldn't risk it. But I'm here. I never stopped thinking of you." Agnes pressed her free hand to her chest, her heart pounding so fiercely she feared it might give out. "I knew it," she whispered through tears. "I knew you weren't gone. I told them all. I told them. But no one believed me." The tears rolled freely now, each one carrying both joy and pain, for the sound of Hannah's voice was a miracle, but also a wound. The girl she had raised, the girl who once laughed in her kitchen, had been lost in shadows all this time, carrying burdens no young woman should ever bear. "Grandma," Hannah said, her voice trembling, "I can't stay long. I'm still inside, still pretending to be one of them. If they find out who I am, if they realize I called, everything will fall apart. I need you to know I'm alive, but I'm not safe yet." Agnes gripped the phone tighter. As if by sheer strength, she could pull Hannah back through the line into her arms. "I don't care how long it takes," she whispered fiercely. "I will wait. I will fight. I will do whatever it takes until you are safe. You hear me, Hannah? You are not alone." On the other end came a soft sob, muffled quickly, then the hurried whisper of goodbye. The line went dead, leaving Agnes in the silence of her small room, her cheeks wet, her body trembling, but her spirit alight with renewed fire. Her granddaughter was alive and fighting. And though danger still surrounded her, Agnes now had something she had not felt in years: proof. She sank back onto her bed, the tears still flowing, and pressed her palms together in a wordless prayer. Outside, the snow had stopped, the sky clearing to reveal the faint glimmer of stars, and Agnes knew she had been given a gift: hope, fragile but radiant, enough to carry her through whatever storms were still to come. Somewhere else, Ethan stared at the map of Silver Creek, its crude lines like veins pulsing outward from the heart of a monster, while Rex lay at his side, restless, his ears twitching at sounds that did not exist. And somewhere in the dark, Hannah wiped her tears and returned to her dangerous role, her courage stretched thin but unbroken. The night held them all in its vast silence, 3 stories converging like rivers toward the same ocean. And though none of them could see the others, each carried within them the same truth. The shadows were deeper than they had feared, and the battle had only just begun. The morning after the phone calls was heavy with a stillness that seemed unnatural, the kind of silence that clings to the skin and makes every movement feel watched. Officer Ethan Ward woke from a shallow sleep to the sound of Claire's coughing in the bedroom, a dry, painful sound that pulled him instantly from bed. He rushed to her side, kneeling as she pressed a trembling handkerchief to her lips, her body thin and pale beneath the quilt. The machine beside her bed hummed softly, but it felt to Ethan like the rhythm of a clock counting down. "Easy," he whispered, brushing damp hair back from her forehead, trying to hide the terror tightening his chest. "Breathe slowly, sweetheart. I'm here." She managed a weak smile, her voice cracked, but still carrying that stubborn warmth. "You're always here, Ethan. Don't ever stop." Those words, so simple, dug deeper than she knew, for Ethan carried in his pocket not just the weight of her illness, but also the fresh knowledge of the network, of children hidden away, of a monster sprawling far beyond his reach. He kissed her temple, stayed until her breathing steadied, and then stepped into the kitchen where the light of early dawn crept across the table, illuminating the papers that had haunted him for months. Bills, treatment plans, warnings stamped in red. He dropped heavily into a chair, rubbing his temples, when the phone buzzed again. Not a ring this time, not the sharp call of an official line, but the quiet vibration of a message. He pulled it from his pocket, expecting perhaps Nora Kane with another update. But the number was unknown, and the message short. "If you keep digging, your wife will not see another sunrise." The words stole the breath from his lungs. He read them once, twice, 3 times, the letters burning into him like a brand. His first instinct was anger, a fire that surged hot and wild. But almost instantly it collapsed under the crushing fear that followed. He rose without realizing it, pacing the kitchen, clutching the phone so tightly his knuckles whitened. The world tilted again. His duty as an officer pulling him in one direction, his love for Claire anchoring him in another, the threat hanging between them like a blade. Rex stirred from where he had been lying near the door. The dog rose slowly, stretching, then padded forward, his nails clicking against the tile. He sat in front of Ethan, head tilted, amber eyes sharp and steady. Ethan tried to look away, ashamed that his thoughts were even entertaining surrender. But Rex did not move. He leaned forward, pressing one heavy paw against Ethan's chest, the weight firm, grounding, insistent. Ethan froze. The warmth of Rex's touch spread through him, steadying the chaos in his chest. The German shepherd's gaze held his own with a clarity that seemed almost human, as if saying, "You know who you are. You know what must be done." Ethan dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead against Rex's strong neck, his hands curling into the thick fur. The tears came hot and unbidden, spilling down his cheeks as he whispered words no one else could hear. "I don't know how to choose. If I go forward, I lose her. If I stop, they keep the children." His voice cracked. "Tell me what to do, boy." Rex remained silent, of course, but the steadiness of his presence, the certainty in his stillness, gave Ethan the answer he already carried deep inside. There was no choice. He could not trade one life for another, could not sacrifice Claire to the shadows, nor could he abandon the children to the same fate that had nearly swallowed Hannah. The path ahead was agony, but it was the only one left. Meanwhile, in the quiet halls of Sunny Glen, Agnes Miller sat in her small room with the phone pressed tightly to her ear. The tears from the night before had dried into faint stains on her cheeks, but her spirit had only grown stronger. On the line was Hannah, her voice hushed, urgent, the line crackling with the risk of discovery. "Grandma, listen carefully," Hannah whispered. "They're moving the children soon. I've confirmed the location, an old mine on the outskirts of town. They call it Riverside. That's where they're keeping them." Agnes closed her eyes, gripping the pen so tightly it shook as she wrote the name down on the paper before her. Riverside. The word itself sent a chill through her, not because of the place, but because of the finality it suggested. She imagined dark tunnels, stone walls pressing close, the echo of frightened voices trapped beneath the earth. "What can I do?" Agnes asked, her voice low but fierce. "You've already done more than anyone," Hannah said, her voice breaking with emotion. "But I need your help one more time. Keep your network alive, every friend, every whisper, every set of eyes. We can't move in blind. The Bureau who is preparing, but I can't be sure when. Every hour counts." Agnes nodded, though Hannah could not see her. "You'll have what you need," she promised. "We've waited 10 years, Hannah. We won't fail you now." For a moment the line was quiet, save for the sound of Hannah's soft breathing. "I wish I could see you," she whispered. "You will," Agnes replied firmly, fighting back the tears. "You will come home. Until then, you are not alone. I am with you in every breath." When the call ended, Agnes sat back, the paper in her lap trembling in her hands. She felt the weight of years pressing on her shoulders, yet beneath it burned a strength she had thought long buried. She rose, gathering the notes from her drawer, summoning once again the friends who had never turned her away. The fight was no longer hidden. It had come into the light. Back in Ethan's home, the officer sat in the dim kitchen, the phone still in his hand, Rex's paw still against his chest. He thought of Claire asleep down the hall, her fragile body depending on treatments that cost more than he could give. He thought of Nora Kane's warning, of the map with its red circle. of the message that threatened to steal everything he loved. His heart ached with the weight of two worlds colliding. Yet when he looked into Rex's eyes, he saw no hesitation, no fear, only the silent demand to keep moving forward. Ethan took a deep breath, straightened, and wiped the tears from his face. "All right," he whispered. "We fight." Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the branches against the window, carrying with it the scent of snow and something darker still. Somewhere beyond the quiet streets, the riverside mine waited, its tunnels filled with shadows and secrets. Somewhere beyond the reach of his voice, Hannah walked a knife's edge between discovery and survival. And in the fragile safety of his home, Claire slept, unaware of the storm that threatened to claim them all. The price of choice had been laid bare before him. Ethan had made his decision, but even as he whispered it into the stillness, the weight of what was to come pressed down on him with merciless force, and the question that lingered in his chest was not whether he could survive the fight, but whether those he loved could. The night hung heavy over the mountains. The sky stretched wide and starless, the air sharp with the smell of snow and iron. The riverside mine loomed at the base of the ridge like a scar carved deep into the earth, its yawning entrance black against the pale dust of winter. The road that led to it was little more than gravel and mud, twisted with ruts, forgotten by time except for the fresh tire tracks that cut across its surface, proof that life, dark and hidden, still breathed within. Ethan Ward gripped the steering wheel of his patrol truck, his knuckles pale, his breath loud in the enclosed cab. Beside him, Rex shifted restlessly, muscles tense, the thick fur along his spine bristling as though the air itself carried warning. The German shepherd had been uneasy since they left town, his ears pricked, his amber eyes fixed ahead, every nerve in his body straining toward the unseen. Ethan glanced down at him, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He knew by now that when Rex carried that kind of tension, danger was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty. Far above them, tracing the narrow trail that wound across the ridge, Agnes Miller moved slowly, but with purpose, her coat pulled tight against the cold. At her side walked Hannah, her steps light, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion etched into her face. Grandmother and granddaughter together again after 10 years of silence, bound not by the safety of reunion, but by the urgency of a fight not yet won. Hannah guided Agnes through the shadows, pointing to the faint glow of lights that spilled from vents and cracks in the mountain. "That's where they've hidden them," she whispered. "The children are below." Agnes's heart twisted at the thought of small bodies lying in the dark beneath her feet. She remembered her own nights of grief, the ache of wondering whether Hannah was alive or lost forever. And she thought of the mothers and fathers whose children now lay in those tunnels. She gripped her granddaughter's arm, her voice fierce though low. "We won't let them vanish. Not like they tried with you. Not this time." Meanwhile, down by the road, black SUVs with tinted windows moved like shadows along the tree line. The FBI task force had arrived, their radios crackling, their boots crunching snow, their weapons slung and ready. Yet they were minutes too late. Inside the mine, the plan had already shifted. Dr. Helena Voss, her face pale under the harsh glare of industrial lamps, barked orders to the men who guarded the chamber. "Move them now. Load the children before dawn. We can't risk exposure." Rows of stretchers, each carrying a sedated child, began to roll down the corridors. The children's breaths came shallow, lips parted, eyelids fluttering under the weight of chemicals. The guards lifted them without care, stacking them like fragile cargo, while Helena's eyes darted from face to face, her chest tightening. She whispered Elias's name beneath her breath, as if reminding herself why she endured the sight. Why she allowed herself to become the architect of this horror. Yet beneath the echo of boots and the squeal of metal gurneys, she felt the tremor of doubt. Growing, insistent, gnawing at her resolve. Outside, Ethan cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the sound of his pulse in his ears. He opened the door, the cold air rushing in like a slap, and Rex leapt out, landing softly, head low, body coiled. The night pressed in, heavy, but beneath it Ethan felt the stirring of something larger, as though the mountain itself held its breath. He crouched, adjusting his flashlight, and whispered, "Stay close, boy." Rex's ears flicked, catching sounds beyond human range. The shuffle of boots, the distant groan of machinery, the faint whimper of a child drifting up through stone. He froze, his body rigid, then lifted his head and let out a long, piercing howl. The sound cut through the night like a blade, rising and falling with a rawness that chilled the blood. It was not merely a signal, it was a declaration. The hunt had begun. Ethan's heart lurched as the howl echoed back from the cliffs, startling crows from their perches, sending them spiraling into the darkness. He tightened his grip on his weapon, his eyes narrowing toward the mine entrance, and then Rex moved, a blur of black and tan fur surging forward, his paws pounding the frozen ground. "Rex!" Ethan called, but there was no stopping him. The dog had sensed what lay inside, and nothing would hold him back. From the ridge, Agnes and Hannah heard the howl. Agnes clutched her chest, the sound slicing through her like an omen. "What was that?" she whispered. Hannah's eyes widened, her voice trembling with both awe and recognition. "That's him. That's the canine. They've sent help." She grabbed her grandmother's hand, pulling her forward. "Come on, we have to move before it's too late." Inside the mine, Helena froze mid-step. The howl rolled down the tunnels, bouncing off stone, filling every corridor. For a moment her vision blurred, and she saw not the rows of sedated children, but her own Elias. Lying pale in a hospital bed, whispering for her when the world outside had grown too cruel. She closed her eyes, whispering his name, and when she opened them again, the fear had returned. "Faster!" she snapped at the guards. "We don't have time. Get them out now." But Rex was already in motion, his paws striking sparks on the stone floor as he crossed the threshold of the mine. His nostrils flared, drawing in every scent, the acrid stench of chemicals, the sour sweat of fear, the faint sweetness of children's skin. His growl deepened, a low thunder rolling through his chest, announcing to everyone within earshot that the dark would no longer keep its secrets. Ethan followed hard behind, his flashlight beam cutting through dust and shadow. The tunnels stretched ahead, lined with pipes and broken beams, the walls dripping with water that gleamed like tears. His chest tightened at the sound of muffled cries drifting toward him, too faint to place, too haunting to ignore. He thought of the map hidden in Daniel Cross's jacket, the crude circle around this very place, and realized that every red line drawn on that paper had led to this moment. Outside, the FBI encircled the mine, their radios alive with commands, their boots digging into the snow as they spread into position. Yet the minutes they had lost weighed heavily. They could already see trucks at the far exit, engines rumbling, headlights flashing as guards rushed to load their precious, horrific cargo. From the ridge, Agnes and Hannah moved quickly, their breath visible in the freezing air. Hannah's training kept her steady, but Agnes stumbled on the rocks, her body betraying her years even as her spirit refused to slow. "We're close," Hannah whispered, her eyes fixed on the glow spilling from the mine's vents. "They're right below us." Agnes pressed on, every step fueled by the vision of Hannah as a young girl, stolen from her arms a decade ago. She had prayed for this night, had begged for the chance to fight for her family. And though her lungs burned, she kept moving. Deep within the mine, the collision of paths was inevitable. Rex tore down the corridor, his howl still echoing in the stone. Ethan's footsteps close behind, Helena shouting orders, guards scrambling with the weight of children. And in that fragile moment between silence and violence, the air itself seemed to tremble, as though the earth knew it was about to witness a reckoning that could no longer be delayed. The earth shuddered with a violence that felt alive. A deep groan rising from the stone, as if the mountain itself had been wounded. One moment the tunnels of the riverside mine were filled with the sound of boots and the rattling of gurneys, and the next they exploded with thunder, dust, and fire. Dr. Helena Voss had pressed the detonator with hands that shook, her face pale in the dim light of the underground lamps. The charge was not meant to bring the entire mine down, at least not yet, but to collapse the smaller chambers, to bury evidence, to seal away records and children who could not be moved quickly enough. The boom roared through the cavern, stone cracking, beams splintering, pipes bursting with a hiss of steam and water. Dust filled the air like smoke, choking, blinding, turning the world into a storm of gray. Children on stretchers stirred weakly, some crying out, their small voices lost in the chaos. Metal cots clanged against each other as the walls trembled, the sound rising into a discordant symphony of fear. Guards shouted, stumbling, scrambling to drag their cargo toward the exits. And in the midst of that chaos, Ethan Ward forced his way forward, his lungs burning as the dust wrapped around him like a suffocating cloak. His flashlight beam cut only inches ahead, but the sound was enough. The cries of children, the bark of his partner, the groan of the mountain as it prepared to consume everything inside. "Rex!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. Through the smoke, a shape burst forward, a streak of black and tan fur, muscles coiled, eyes burning bright, even in the darkness. Rex darted between fallen beams and jagged rocks, his paws striking sparks on the stone, his nose guiding him unerringly toward the weakest voices. He lunged onto the first cot, teeth snapping at the straps that bound a small boy in place, tearing them free with desperate precision. The child's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. But when Rex nudged his face with a wet nose, a flicker of life sparked in him. Ethan reached the boy moments later, lifting him from the cot, cradling him against his chest. "You're all right," he whispered, though his own heart thundered with panic. "I've got you. We'll get you out." But the mine was not finished. A second explosion echoed deeper in the tunnels, shaking loose rocks that rained from the ceiling. The ground buckled under Ethan's boots, forcing him to stumble as he shielded the boy with his body. Rex barked furiously, circling him, herding him toward the corridor where the air was marginally clearer. Across the chamber, Hannah pushed through the smoke, her body low, her breath ragged. She had grown up inside the machinery of this nightmare, and the sounds of detonations, of collapsing stone, struck chords of memory deep inside her. But she no longer ran in fear. She ran toward the heart of it, toward the woman who had haunted her dreams for a decade. She found Helena near the command table, her lab coat torn, her face streaked with soot. The doctor's eyes were wild, her chest heaving, her hands trembling as she fumbled with another charge. Hannah's steps slowed, her body taut with both rage and sorrow. "Helena!" she shouted, her voice carrying above the storm of sound. The older woman froze, her head snapping up. Their eyes met across the chaos, one filled with fury, the other with a grief that had long since curdled into desperation. "You," Helena whispered, her lips barely forming the word. "I know you. You're the one who slipped away." Hannah stepped closer, her fists clenched at her sides. "I was 16 when you drugged me, when you strapped me to a bed and called me nothing but a number. You stole 10 years of my life. You stole hundreds of others. And now you're going to answer for it." Helena's face twisted, torn between shame and defiance. "You don't understand," she cried, her voice cracking. "I did it for Elias. My boy is dying. Every experiment, every test, it was all to save him. I had no choice." "No choice?" Hannah spat the words like poison. "You turned children into lab rats. You carved names out of them and replaced them with numbers. You made us ghosts. That wasn't love, Helena. That was madness." The detonations rumbled again, closer now, sending a fissure splitting down the wall between them. Dust cascaded in thick clouds, and yet neither woman moved. They stood rooted in the storm, survivor and tormentor, bound together by a decade of suffering. Helena's hands trembled as she held the detonator close to her chest. Tears welled in her eyes, streaking down her soot-stained cheeks. "You think I don't know what I've become?" she whispered. "Every night I see their faces. Every night I hear them call for their mothers. But what was I supposed to do? Let my son die while the world ignored him? I chose wrong, I know that. But I chose for love." Hannah's throat tightened. For a moment she saw not a monster, but a mother. Broken and desperate, clutching the memory of a child she loved more than her own life. Yet the rage inside her was stronger, the memory of pain deeper. She stepped closer, her voice fierce, unyielding. "Love does not excuse this. Love does not bury children in cages. Love does not destroy everything in its path." She pointed toward the collapsing chamber where Ethan and Rex fought to free the others. "Look at them. Look at the lives you are about to bury. If you truly loved your son, then honor him by ending this. Stop the killing. Stop the lies." For a heartbeat, Helena faltered. Her fingers slackened on the detonator, her body trembling. But then the image of Elias surged again in her mind, his frail body, his pleading eyes, and she clutched it tighter. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't let him go." The ceiling groaned, a massive beam snapping and crashing down between them, showering sparks as wires tore free. Hannah leapt aside, shielding her face, her heart hammering. When the dust settled, Helena was still there, still clutching the device, her eyes blazing with a mother's torment. Ethan's voice carried through the chaos as he staggered into view, a child in his arms, Rex at his side dragging another free by the sleeve of his shirt. "We're running out of time," he shouted. Hannah turned back to Helena, her voice breaking. "So choose. Right here, right now. Will you be remembered as the doctor who damned children, or as the mother who finally stopped the nightmare?" Helena's lips parted, her breath trembling, her shoulders slumping under the unbearable weight of the question. Around them, the mine crumbled, the cries of children rising against the thunder of falling stone. And in that moment, as dust choked the air and the mountain itself threatened to consume them, Helena Voss stood at the crossroads of her soul, torn between love and ruin, between damnation and redemption. The mine was breaking apart with every breath, the stone walls groaning like the ribs of some dying beast, the floor splitting and trembling beneath boots and paws alike. Dust poured from the ceiling in heavy clouds, choking, clinging, filling the lungs with grit, while faint sparks of fire lit the tunnels in flashes of red and gold. The cries of children rose in uneven waves, soft whimpers, broken calls for mothers who were not there. And against that chorus moved Rex, his body low, his strength stretched to its limit, refusing to yield. The German shepherd pushed through the debris, his powerful frame streaked with soot, his amber eyes narrowed with focus. A beam had collapsed across one row of cots, pinning 3 of the stretchers beneath a tangle of rock and steel. Rex lunged forward, claws scraping against the stone, teeth sinking into the straps of the first stretcher. He tugged with a guttural growl, his muscles quivering with strain until the small body slid free. The child coughed weakly, dust covering his face, and Rex nudged him toward Ethan, who appeared through the smoke to lift the boy into his arms. But Rex did not stop. His chest heaved, his tongue dark with dust, and blood now streaked his muzzle. Cuts from sharp stone, wounds he ignored. He turned back, clamped his jaws around the second stretcher, and pulled again, inch by inch, the weight dragging against him. The beam shifted dangerously above, but Rex did not falter. He dragged the child clear, shoved him forward with a push of his head, and then returned for the third, the last, the smallest. His breath rattled, but his determination blazed. No cage, no fire, no collapsing world would make him abandon them. In the center of it all stood Dr. Helena Voss, frozen in the storm she had unleashed. Her eyes darted across the chaos, Ethan staggering beneath the weight of 2 children, Agnes guiding little ones through the narrow tunnel toward the surface, Hannah pressing her back against a wall as another explosion cracked the ceiling. Helena's heart beat so hard it felt like fire inside her chest. Around her, the life's work she had twisted into horror crumbled into rubble. The screams, the dust, the children. This was her legacy. Her gaze fell upon the bomb, the final charge she had kept close, the last card she had intended to use to erase the evidence once and for all. For a moment, her hand trembled as she clutched it, the edges of the casing biting into her palm. She thought of Elias, her boy with the gap-toothed grin, her boy whose laughter she could still hear in memory. He was gone now, long gone, the treatments too late, the disease too cruel. She had destroyed so many for a hope that had slipped through her fingers like water. Helena dropped to her knees, dust swirling around her, tears streaking the soot on her cheeks. She pressed the bomb to her chest as though it were a child, rocking gently. "Elias," she whispered, her voice soft and broken. "Mama's coming. Mama's coming to see you." The detonator in her hand blinked once, a steady red light, and she smiled through her tears. It was not a smile of triumph, but of surrender, the kind of smile that belonged to someone finally laying down a burden too heavy to bear. She rose to her feet, her lab coat torn and stained, her face streaked with sorrow, and began to walk. Hannah's eyes widened, her voice catching. "No, Helena, stop!" But Helena did not stop. She clutched the bomb tighter and staggered toward the entrance where the night air bled faintly through the smoke. Each step was unsteady, her body frail, yet her resolve was iron. She reached the tunnel mouth, turned once to look back at the chamber of children, and in that instant, the torment in her eyes softened. "I'm sorry," she whispered to no one and everyone. Then she ran. The last of her strength carried her through the tunnel, past the startled guards, into the open night. She lifted her face toward the stars that she had not seen in months and pressed the trigger to her chest. The explosion tore through the darkness, a bloom of fire and thunder that shook the earth. The shockwave ripped across the mountainside, scattering snow and rock, sending the FBI agents outside diving for cover. Flames leapt skyward, illuminating the trees in stark orange light, the sound echoing for miles. Inside the mine, the walls buckled, but the collapse stopped short of the main chamber. Rubble sealed side tunnels, smoke poured like a tide, but the core remained standing. Helena's final act had spared the children inside, destroying herself and the evidence she once sought to protect, leaving behind only the echo of her sacrifice. Agnes stumbled forward, her arms wrapped around a little girl whose legs trembled with weakness. "This way, darlings," she urged, her voice both gentle and fierce. Her body was weary, her breath ragged, but she guided them through the corridor, one after another, as though each child were her own. Her heart swelled with both sorrow and triumph, the pain of seeing innocence so scarred, the joy of knowing they would breathe air under the open sky again. Hannah moved beside her, strong where Agnes faltered, her hands gripping the shoulders of the older children, pushing them forward. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes blazing with purpose. She thought of her own years in captivity, of the nights she had wondered if her grandmother still believed in her, and she swore silently that these children would never endure what she had. Ethan turned, his arms aching from carrying two boys at once, and called out above the roar of falling stone. "Agnes, Hannah, get them out. I'll cover the rear." His eyes darted through the smoke, searching desperately. Rex, where are you?" No answer came, only the distant crack of stone. Panic surged through him, hotter than fire, sharper than fear. He shoved the boys into Agnes's arms and turned back into the thickest smoke, his flashlight beam slashing through the dust. "Rex," he bellowed, his throat raw. "Come on, boy. Answer me." At last, a shape appeared, staggering from the far end of the chamber. Rex dragged the final stretcher, his body slick with blood and soot, his chest heaving with exhaustion. His muzzle was torn, crimson staining the fur around his mouth. But his eyes still burned with that same fire, refusing to surrender. He pulled the child until Ethan rushed forward, lifting the small body into his arms. "Good boy," Ethan choked, dropping to his knees, pulling Rex close with his free hand. "You saved them all. You saved them." Rex pressed his head against Ethan's chest, his breath ragged, but his tail thumped once against the stone, a faint rhythm of defiance against the darkness. The mine groaned again, a final warning, and Ethan staggered to his feet. With Rex limping at his side, he pushed through the collapsing corridor toward the light, where Agnes and Hannah had gathered the children. Together, they spilled into the night, coughing, trembling, their eyes wide as they stared at the flames, still licking the sky. Behind them, the riverside mine collapsed inward, stone and steel devouring itself, sealing forever the place that had been both prison and tomb. The fire of Helena's sacrifice burned hot against the stars, and then dimmed into embers, leaving only smoke curling upward into the frozen air. On the mountainside, children clung to Agnes, their tears soaking into her coat, their small hands gripping her arms as if she were the only anchor left in the world. Hannah crouched among them, her voice low, steady, promising safety. And Ethan stood a little apart, Rex leaning against his leg, the weight of the dog grounding him in the fragile moment between survival and despair. He looked once more toward the ruins of the mine, his heart heavy with the faces he could not save, but also lifted by the lives that now breathed beside him. In the silence after the storm, he understood the truth. Redemption, even at its highest cost, was possible. And though Helena Voss had lived her last moment in fire, her final act had given the children a chance to live theirs in light. The night around the riverside mine was thick with smoke, the mountainside glowing faintly where fire licked at the sky. And in the aftermath of Helena Voss's sacrifice, Silence fell heavy, broken only by the ragged breaths of children huddled together under blankets. Agents hurried among them, their voices low but urgent, guiding, tending, counting heads, each number whispered like a prayer of gratitude. Agnes held a girl close against her chest, rocking her softly as if she were Hannah 10 years younger. Her lips pressed against the child's hair. Hannah herself moved quickly through the group, her eyes darting between frightened faces, making sure no one was lost, no one overlooked. Ethan stood a short distance away, his chest heaving, his shirt torn, his skin streaked with dust and blood that was not his own. Beside him sat Rex, body lowered but eyes still bright, tongue lolling as he drew in shallow breaths. The dog's flanks rose and fell unevenly, each motion labored, yet even in exhaustion his gaze swept the tree line as if daring the darkness to try again. Ethan bent low, his hand pressed firmly into the thick fur at Rex's neck. "You did good, boy," he whispered. "You did more than I ever could." But peace was not yet theirs. From the shadows at the far edge of the encampment, a figure emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, his expensive coat torn and dust-stained, his face gaunt but burning with rage. Victor Kane, the true architect of the network. The man who had hidden in comfort while others carried his orders into the depths of hell, now stumbled into the open, his eyes darting wildly from the flames to the cluster of agents, to the path that might still lead him into the wilderness. For years he had built his empire in silence, a shadow behind every abduction, every shipment, every scream swallowed by stone. And now, in a single night, it had begun to crumble. His fortune meant nothing, his soldiers scattered, his mind collapsing into ruin. But survival was still within reach. He turned, his boots crunching on gravel, his breath hissing through clenched teeth as he began to run. Rex's ears twitched, his head lifted sharply, amber eyes narrowing, nostrils flaring at the scent carried through smoke. A growl rumbled low in his chest, deep and primal, the sound of a hunter recognizing prey. Ethan followed his gaze, his own heart lurching when he saw Kane sprinting across the open ground, his silhouette flickering against the glow of fire. "Victor Kane," Ethan muttered under his breath, the name tasting of bile. Before he could call out, Rex moved. The German shepherd surged to his feet, pain forgotten, his body a streak of black and tan launching forward with the fury of every child's cry made flesh. His paws struck sparks against stone, his body low, his muscles straining as he crossed the distance in heartbeats. Kane heard him, turned just as the dog collided with him. The impact sent them both crashing to the ground, Kane's shout torn from his throat, mingled with Rex's roar. The dog's teeth sank deep into his forearm, the crunch of bone sharp even beneath the roar of flames. Kane screamed, thrashing, his free hand pounding against Rex's skull, but the shepherd's grip was unyielding, forged in loyalty and rage. Ethan sprinted after them, shouting, his flashlight beam cutting through the haze. He saw Kane's face twisted with pain, blood streaming as Rex tore into his arm, shaking his head with a savagery that came from somewhere ancient, somewhere unbreakable. Kane tried to rise, but Rex lunged again, jaws snapping onto his leg, tearing muscle, dragging him down into the dirt. The man's scream rose higher, echoing off the walls of the collapsing mountain, a sound of power stripped bare, of cruelty meeting its reckoning. He writhed, clawed at the ground, but Rex was relentless, his growls vibrating through the earth, his fur streaked with blood and dust, his body refusing to surrender even as his own wounds burned. Above them, the mountain groaned. The mine's final support beams, weakened by Helena's blast, gave way with a deafening crack. Stones cascaded like thunder, the ground shuddering, the night alive with the sound of collapse. Ethan froze for a heartbeat, his eyes locked on Cain pinned beneath Rex, his mouth open in a howl of pain and fury. And then the mountain delivered its judgment. A slab of rock, massive and merciless, broke free from the ridge. It struck the ground with a roar, crushing earth and bone alike. Cain's scream ended in an instant, silenced beneath tons of stone. The dust rose high, and when it cleared, there was nothing left but rubble where the tyrant had fallen. Rex staggered free at the last second, collapsing onto his side a few feet away, his chest heaving, his muzzle dripping with blood that was not all his enemy's. Ethan dropped to his knees beside him, gathering the dog into his arms, cradling him as though he were as fragile as the children they had saved. His own eyes blurred with tears as he pressed his forehead against Rex's, his voice breaking. "You're alive," he whispered, choking on the words. "You're alive, you stubborn, beautiful boy. You did it. You ended him. You're a hero." Rex blinked slowly, his body trembling, his tail brushing weakly against Ethan's arm. His breath came shallow, but his eyes, those fierce, loyal eyes, still glimmered with fire. He pressed his head deeper into Ethan's chest, as though to say he had no regrets. Behind them, agents closed in, their voices echoing, but for Ethan the world had narrowed to the dog in his arms, to the warmth still pulsing beneath blood and fur, to the truth that all the chaos and pain of this night had led here, to this bond that nothing could shatter. The mind collapsed fully then, a thunderous final breath as the tunnels caved, sealing away the ghosts forever. The echoes rolled down the valley, scattering the silence. But above it all remained Ethan's voice, steady despite the tremor in his throat, a vow whispered into the ear of his companion. "You're not just my partner, Rex. You're my brother. You're the bravest soul I've ever known. And tonight you saved us all." The wind carried the words into the smoke, into the night that had borne so much pain. And for the first time in hours, Ethan felt not despair, but the fragile spark of victory. The storm of the riverside mine was over, but its echoes reached far beyond the mountain. In the days that followed, the world seemed to wake from a long sleep. The shadows torn open, and the truth finally dragged into the light. Newspapers ran headlines in bold black print. Child trafficking network exposed. Television anchors spoke in hushed, solemn tones about the children discovered in the mine, about the experiments that had been conducted in secret laboratories, about the fraud that had preyed on the elderly, whose savings had been siphoned into the empire of cruelty. And for every statistic, for every fact delivered into the open, there were faces. Faces of children blinking at the sunlight after years of darkness. Faces of parents reunited. Faces of agents who carried scars invisible to the eye. The name Victor Cain became a curse, spoken in outrage across counties and states, his empire of deceit laid bare. Yet his death beneath the collapsing mine meant he would never stand trial, never answer the questions that burned in every grieving heart. But his absence left something stronger than punishment: the chance to rebuild without his shadow. Documents recovered from his offices revealed not only the network's reach, but its greed, the way it had woven tendrils into hospitals, charities, and even courts. The revelation shocked a nation, but it also awakened a will to change. Through it all, Ethan Ward found himself at the center of the storm, his name called in press conferences, his photograph printed alongside Rex's in stories of bravery. Yet he turned away from the cameras, preferring the quiet of his own home, where his wife Claire sat by the window, her cheeks flushed with a health he had not seen in months. The stranglehold of the syndicate had been broken, and with it the manipulation that had kept her treatments hostage. For the first time, doctors spoke plainly of her care, offering paths forward free from corruption. Ethan watched her smile return, faint at first, then growing stronger, and with each smile he felt the weight of his choices ease. Rex, his wounds bound, healed in body though never fully in spirit. The scars along his muzzle remained, threads of crimson etched into black and tan fur, but they became marks of honor, signs of his courage. Yet more than a fighter, Rex revealed another side in the days that followed. He began to visit the children rescued from the mine, padding softly into the recovery center where they sat in rows of beds, their eyes wide and wary. At first they shrank back, haunted by memories of dogs used as guards, teeth bared in the shadows of captivity. But Rex lowered himself to the floor, pressing his muzzle gently into their hands, letting them feel the warmth of breath, the steadiness of heartbeat. Slowly, the fear melted, replaced by tentative touches, by small hands gripping fur instead of steel. Rex became more than a rescuer. He became a healer. Word spread, and soon he was invited into schools, hospitals, homes where children bore scars no medicine could erase. He walked among them with calm dignity, lying at their feet as they told stories, nudging them when their voices broke, sitting guard when nightmares crept too close. In his steady eyes, they found safety. In his unwavering presence, they found trust. He was no longer just Ethan's partner. He was a companion to all who needed him. Meanwhile, Agnes and Hannah began to rebuild the life that had been stolen from them. Agnes's home, once a quiet place filled only with memories, transformed into something alive. The front porch became a gathering place for neighbors and volunteers. The living room, a meeting hall for survivors. The spare bedrooms, a refuge for those with nowhere else to go. Together, grandmother and granddaughter turned grief into purpose, shaping the house into a center of hope. Children came with eyes still clouded by fear, and Agnes welcomed them with arms that had ached empty for too long. Hannah sat with them, her voice steady as she shared her own survival, proof that darkness could be endured, that light could still be found. The community rallied, donations flowing, volunteers offering time and skill. What had once been only 4 walls now bore a sign above the door. The Haven at Riverside. It stood not just as a building, but as a promise that no child would be forgotten, no family left to despair in silence. Agnes would walk its halls each morning, her heart swelling as she heard laughter returning, the sound of children chasing each other in the yard, their voices rising above the winter wind like birdsong breaking the silence of dawn. And through it all, Rex was there. He lay on the porch as the children played, watching with eyes alert, his ears flicking at every shout, his tail thumping softly when one of them came to sit beside him. They clung to him, whispered secrets into his fur, fell asleep with their hands buried in his coat. He became a constant, a guardian whose love asked nothing in return. Ethan often stood at the edge of the yard, his hands in his pockets, watching it all unfold. He had seen hell, had walked through smoke and fire, had carried the weight of impossible choices. And yet here, in the laughter of children and the sight of his wife smiling in the sun, he found the answer he had searched for. That life after darkness was possible. Not easy, not without scars, but possible. One morning, weeks later, winter lay heavy upon the town, snow falling in soft, quiet flakes that blanketed rooftops and softened the sharp edges of the world. The air was still, the kind of silence that comes only after a storm has passed, and the earth takes a long breath of rest. Ethan stepped onto the porch, a mug of coffee warm in his hand, the steam curling into the cold air. He looked out at the yard where the snow lay untouched, pure as a promise. and then his gaze fell to Rex. The German shepherd lay stretched on the wooden boards, his body strong again, though lined with the story of every battle. Snowflakes clung to his fur, melting slowly into droplets, his breath rising in steady clouds. His eyes were open, clear and bright, reflecting the pale light of dawn. He lifted his head, watching the children inside as they stirred awake, his gaze steady, protective, filled with a kind of peace that words could never capture. Ethan knelt beside him, resting a hand on his back, feeling the solid warmth beneath. "You did it, boy," he whispered. "You carried us through." Rex's tail brushed once against the wood, his eyes never leaving the children within, his body still as stone but his spirit alive, fierce, unbroken. In that moment he was not just a dog, not just a partner or healer. He was a symbol, the embodiment of loyalty that endures fire and darkness, of courage that does not yield even when the world crumbles, of love that asks nothing but gives everything. The snow fell heavier, blanketing the house, the town, the scars of the mine hidden beneath the purity of winter. And on that porch, in the quiet of a morning, where the past had finally loosened its grip, Rex lay watchful, his eyes alight with a simple, eternal truth. That even after the deepest night, there is always a dawn, and that love, silent, steadfast, unconditional, remains.